Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the Sandbox, everybody. Good to have you guys. Let's open up in prayer. And we got an exciting one tonight. This is going to be really cool. If you guys got my email, and I hope that you guys all open up the emails, that if you see an email come from Oaks of Righteousness or from New Hope, please open those up. We have about almost a 60% opening rate, which is higher than the average email accounts out there. So they typically say about 30% of emails are opened up from a company or from a congregation. So we're at about 60% of the people opening them up. But if you get it, it's just I try to send it out only one time a week. I try not to overwhelm anybody. And I try to make the emails very short. And it's just an update on New Hope, and it's an update on the Bible study for Oaks of Righteousness. So for the Sandbox. So I encourage you guys all to open those up. But let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for this opportunity to be back and to minister your word and to look at a deeper aspect of Passover that some people may not have even heard of, and some people may not have even adopted. And so, Lord, we just want to come before you, open our hearts, our minds, help me to be able to relate this deep message in a way that I can teach it so it's easily gathered, it's easily learned, Lord, and then we can look at it into a deeper aspect of it. So, Lord, bless this evening. Give us focus and strength. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tikmanu la'asok divrei Torah. Amen. Blessed are you, Lord God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth, who sanctifies us in your commandments and commands us concerning the study of the Torah. Hallelujah. Amen. Amen. All right, guys. So what we're going to look at is, or actually what I've called this tonight is of blood and goats. Of blood and goats. So this is going to be the title of it, of blood and goats, and what's that got to do? Because we're approaching Passover, I wanted to spend a little bit time now, which is about a month before Passover, to talk about this idea of Passover and what it was kind of, what it would have looked like to the first, to the ancients, to the ancient Israelites, the Hebrews, in those days, of what was really going on here. And if I hope to try to bring that together tonight. It might be very difficult for me to do so, but I hope that we can bring it together. This is based off of a sermon I did about 4 years ago, and teaching on this sermon, I was able to do it. But I remember that with the sermon and stuff, it was very difficult to try to relate across, because I don't know if people quite got the picture. But I'm going to share a couple of videos with you guys tonight too that are on Instagram that I want to show you guys, that I think are just, they show this beautiful picture of what I think Pesach is all about. So a couple of things to start off with is, number one is to remember the Hebrew words for this. So in Hebrew, what we call the Passover lamb, technically it's a noun, and it's the word Pesach. Okay, so it's spelled with a P-E-S-A-C-H, Pesach. Okay, now that is a Hebrew word. It's a Hebrew noun. There's another word that comes over that we get the word Passover from, but it's a Hebrew loan word, and I'm going to explain what that means. But it's a Hebrew loan word, or it's a Hebrew borrowed word from another language, so Egyptian. Okay, it's called the word Pasach. Pasach. Okay, so it's P-A-S-C-H. Okay, P-A-S-A-C-H. Pasach. So you have Pasach and Pesach. Two different words. Pesach is a noun and Pasach is a verb. Okay, so there's action required in the word Pasach, and Pasach is listed in the scriptures as well as Pesach. So they're both in the scriptures, but we translate both of them the same way. And what's interesting is that scholars know this, and even translators know this, but they just translate it as Passover, but they don't really translate it as what it should be. Okay, so we're going to look at it, and then I'll show you guys in the Hebrew. And I know that Thomas likes to look into this stuff, so Thomas will definitely be looking into this, and it'll be really good. But go ahead, Linda.
Quick question, which one is the noun?
The noun is Pesach. That's the one that we're used to.
Refers to the lamb.
The Passover lamb.
Okay,
yeah.
That's all I need to know.
And you've heard, we've heard in more traditional churches like the Presbyterian churches, Lutheran churches, Episcopalians, they call it the Paschal Lamb. How many have heard that term? The Paschal Lamb. Okay, so use this word Paschal Lamb. Okay, it's just another phrase that comes from this Pasach, but in Hebrew it's the word Pesach. Okay, so again, Pesach is a noun. Pasach is a verb. Okay, so that just helps. And I think that if we can capture what's going on here, so tonight, instead of talking about all the details on how Passover is supposed to be celebrated, because I don't want to get confused on this, I want to go deeper into the very meaning of it and find out what was really going on here. And what did the Egyptians see? And what did the Israelites see? What did they actually experience? Well, they weren't really Israel, they were the Hebrews, what the ancients would have experienced during this time. Okay, so you're going to hear something new. And like what I said tonight, it's been mistranslated. So it doesn't mean that it takes away anything, but understanding it a different way, it's going to be something. So let me read a couple of things to you. Scholar Meredith Klein writes about the avian, or the bird, imagery of God regarding Passover. So I would like you to keep that image alive while we discuss this today. There are some who are taking my Hebrew class. You guys have taken my Hebrew class, and you guys have understood of the Hebraic meanings of the New Testament. We've talked about that. But there's an avian image here. There's a bird image of God with this Egyptian word, Pasach, but Pasach doesn't quite come from Egypt. It does, but it comes from a couple of different words. Let me show you something here. I'm just going to show you the images right now. Let me share. Let me share something here with you guys real quick. Okay, I'm going to open this up and let me know if you guys can see this. Can you guys see that? See the bird? Okay. Look at the bird right there. See it hovering over and opening up its wings and hovering over its chicks. And then another one right here. Look at that. Isn't that cool? Okay. It's just really awesome. The one picture I was looking for, which I saw just a couple of days ago, was a one of an eagle or a hawk in a snowy blizzard type of thing covering its chicks. And it stayed like that the whole night. And then in the morning, it kind of shook itself off, and the snow was kind of garnering like that, and the chicks were underneath it. And the chicks were completely covered, fully covered by this massive storm, by a big, huge hawk or an eagle that was covering. I couldn't find that one, but I found this one. And then watch this other one right here, which I think is pretty cool too. Look at this one here. I think this is a beautiful picture. Look at this right here. This is great. Let me get to, let's see if it'll play. It's not quite playing, but you can see the issue here again, where the bird is here covering over. And notice how it's more the female bird, not the male bird. So you have this here. And so look at that. That is such an amazing picture. I love that, of that bluebird there, or whatever it is, covering up the chicks like that. That's such a beautiful picture. Okay, so let me stop sharing that. I want you guys to keep this in mind with the word Pasach. Okay, so this is literally kind of the idea behind Pasach. So when we hear the word Passover, it really doesn't depict what's kind of going on. When I think of Passover, I'm thinking of something that just kind of simply passes over. Like when I'm driving my car and I pass over a bump, I'm just kind of going over a bump, or I go over a speed bump and I'm passing over the speed bump. And it's like there's not a lingering that's going on here. If you look at this picture of this bird and look at the picture of the other bird, it's getting drenched and it's taking on the rain to protect the people. And this is a great image of what Pasach means, because God hovered over the Israelites. He hovered over them and took the wrath that was sent to become the destroyer over the Egyptians. So God himself was taking on the same wrath that was being poured out and taking on that death, so to speak, to protect us and cover us. Is that not a beautiful image of what Yeshua did? Yeshua went to the cross. He was hovering. He was up on the cross. He wasn't just floating in the air, passing over the cross. He bore the entire cross. He took on the sins of the world. He took on all that stuff. And when he did that, he endured the sins of mankind. And then by enduring the sins of mankind, he was able to give us freedom of forgiveness and freedom from sin. So this hovering, this Pasach, is really important. As we're talking about this, it's really important to see the correlation between that, looking at these birds here and seeing this picture here, that bird is taking on all of the weather, all the weather and doing its best to protect the chicks. Here it is again, taking on the all the weather. I mean, this one is just awesome. I love this one here. It's really great. Look at that. That is just such an amazing picture there. The rain is coming down, it's beating up on her wings, and she is lovingly covering her chicks, keeping them from getting massively wet and catching a cold. Okay, but that's just a little joke. Because, you remember me and Linda were talking about that this week, like old wives' tales, and one of the old mother's wives' tales, get out of the rain before you catch a cold. So she doesn't want her chicks to get a cold. And then we see here, look at this one is amazing. She's even covering her husband or the male. Isn't that awesome? Just standing up above and taking it. This is the image of Yeshua and God with all the plagues that were hitting Egypt. This is the image, especially on Passover night when the destroyer angel came to destroy Egypt, or the firstborn. There was the death of the firstborn. God himself was covering over, not only in this point of passing over or hovering over, but the blood of the lamb was on the doorpost. So not only through the doorway was they covered, but from the top they were covered, and God himself was taking on this role to protect us in a way that is this. Okay, this is pretty cool. Okay, so let me stop sharing that and go back to this. Okay, so that's really great imagery. Does everybody catch that there? That's really awesome. So let's go to Exodus chapter 12. So just open up to Exodus chapter 12, and let's just read this story. And when we get to verse 11, I will point out to you guys certain things here. But Exodus chapter 11. Okay, I got to go to Exodus. I couldn't find my other Bible for whatever reason. That reminds me of a story. You guys want to hear a little joke? Okay. Can you guys endure a little joke? It'll be kind of fun. All right. So a husband and wife decide to host a dinner, a Passover, not a Passover, just host a Shabbat dinner for a rabbi and his wife. And they invite the rabbi over, and they had a great dinner, and the wife and everybody had fun. But after the rabbi and his wife left, as the wife was cleaning up the kitchen and doing all that kind of stuff, she goes, I think Rabbi Adrian stole my silverware, my spoon. And the husband's like, what do you mean? He goes, I think he took my spoon. And he goes, no, I don't think that he would have taken your spoon. That's a silver. That spoon is silver, and it's an heirloom. And he goes, I don't know. I don't think about it. Well, the wife just kind of put that in her heart, kind of been. But over time, she started getting a little bitter, a little angry at Rabbi Adrian, and saying, I think he really stole the spoon because I can't find it anywhere. And the husband says, well, I don't know. Let's not talk to him about it, but we'll ask him later. We'll ask him some other time. Well, a whole year goes by, and they decided to have Rabbi Adrian and Linda over again for dinner. So they had Rabbi Adrian and Linda over for dinner, and they're sitting around and they're eating, and she just can't control herself. The wife just can't control herself. And she says, Rabbi, I need to ask you an honest question, and can I be honest and serious? And he goes, sure. She goes, I've actually been having anger issues and a little resentment. I felt like last time you were here, you stole my one of you guys had stolen our silver spoon. That was part of our silver set, and it's an heirloom from my mom, and I'm having a real hard time with this. And did you take the spoon? He goes, yeah. And then I said, yeah, I took the spoon. Well, why would you take it? He goes, I put it in your Bible. It's a stupid joke, but I love it. She couldn't find the spoon because she hasn't read her Bible in a whole year. So that sounds like me can't find my Bible. I've been looking for my Bible every old place. I can't find the right one I wanted to use, so I got to use a different one. Anyhow, that's a funny little joke. It's corny. Yeah, I know it's corny. All right, I liked it, but I'm sure somebody could deliver it and do a better job at it than I did. All right. Okay, so Exodus chapter 12, Shemot is in the Hebrew. And it says here, Adonai spoke to Moshe. Now I'm reading I haven't read out of this version in a long time because I use this for the commentary I'm writing, but I do enjoy it. But I just think sometimes it's too heavily Yiddishkeit, too much Yiddishkeit, too much Hebrew in it. But it's from the complete Jewish Bible. Some people love that version, but I do love it, but it is a heavier version as far as using Yiddishkeit, Yiddish words and Hebrew words. They did change it a little bit and got it a little bit better. Adonai spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, and he said, you are to begin your calendar with this month. It will be the first month of the year for you. Speak to all the assembly of Israel and say, on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb or a kid for his family, one per household. Except that if the household is too small for a whole lamb or kid, then he and his next door neighbor should share one, dividing it in proportion to the number of the people eating it. Your animal must be without defect, a male in its first year, and you may choose it from either the sheep or the goats. It's interesting, we never talk about the goats in this one type of thing. It's like from any of the lambs. Now, here's what's interesting for me. Um, I have a theory, and I think I've shared this theory with you. I don't know if you guys agree or not. Um, but my theory is that Yeshua didn't have a 3-year ministry experience. I believe in the book of John, it was falsely added in by the Catholic Church that he had went to a third Passover, but it doesn't really have that, because when you look at it in the book of John and the festivals there, it doesn't really line up for another Passover. I really actually believe that Yeshua was, his ministry lasted for just about 2 years. And the reason I say that is because he was the Passover lamb. And the Passover lamb had to be of 1 year old, which means it could not be 2 years old. But it could mean that it could be almost 2 years old. Does that make sense? So that's my theory. If he fulfilled everything else in Passover from everything, he fulfilled so much of the Passover lamb. Coming in on the 10th of Nisan, dying on the 14th of Nisan, being buried before the high holy day or the high Sabbath of Feast of Unleavened Bread, rising on the first fruits, all this type of stuff. Why would he have not fulfilled that as the Passover lamb that was known to the people and then brought in after just before 2 years? So anyhow, that's my theory on that. And I'll stick with it. What is it? What's the saying? That's uh
I don't remember the saying.
something. That's
That's
my
my
argument.
story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Like a good story.
It sounds like a good story.
Yeah, logical.
It's logical. So you are to keep it until the 14th day of the month, and then the entire assembly of the community of Israel will slaughter it at dusk. So this is one Pesach, and that's the right Hebrew word, which means Passover lamb, Pesach. Okay, slaughter it at dusk. They are to take some of the blood and smear it on the two sides and the top of the door frame at the entrance of the house in which they eat it. That night they are to eat of the meat roasted in the fire. They are to eat it with matzah and maor, bitter herbs, and flattened bread or unleavened bread. Do not eat it raw or boiled. That's really important, but roasted in the fire with its head, the lower imparts of its legs, and the inner organs. Let nothing of it remain till morning. If any of it does remain, burn it up completely. So the sacrifice needed to be consumed fully with the people in proportion to the amount of people in the family and the household, and you were able to invite somebody over and to do it. But if you didn't consume it all, you had to roast it completely. You had to burn it up completely. Okay. Now we get to verse 11. Here is how you are to eat it: with your belt fastened, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you are to eat it hurriedly. It is Adonai's Pesach. So this is the correct term in the Hebrew. This word Pesach is what it says. So this is a noun. So this is Adonai's Pesach, the lamb, Passover lamb. For that night I will pass through. That's the verb. There's a verb there, okay? And that verb is tavar, and we'll talk more about that verb, okay? So this verb, lavar, is connected to Pasach that we talked about. It's an Egyptian word. And this is really important that why this is doing this. Okay, so I will pass through. So this is where this word pass through, I think, has been not correctly translated. This is right here. It says, for that night, I will hover over. I think that is a better translation. Okay, so to hover over, or to, what's the other word? To, not so much just to hover, but to, let me see, I have it written down here. Well, when we come to it, I'll do it. But for the first one, to hover over, okay? So that's the idea behind this, and that's more of an accurate translation there. I will hover over, and if you have if you do have the complete Jewish Bible, you'll actually see that it actually renders that right here. It says, I will pass over, and then it says Hebrew Pasach. Now that's where I think they got that wrong. The Hebrew, it's a loan word from the Egyptian, so the Hebrew uses that word Pasach, but it doesn't. It's not really a Hebrew word. It's the roots of it, even though it's very similar to Pesach, really falls underneath the idea of hovering. Okay, so when I strike the land of Egypt, the death blow will not strike you. Then it says here in verse, and then that's another one here. Because the blood, oh wait, yeah, the gods, oh wait, I jumped ahead. I'm sorry. I'm verse 12. Let's go back to verse 12. For that night I will pass through or hover over the land of Egypt, and I will kill the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both men and animals, and I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. This is important. Highlight that, underline that. I will execute judgment on all the gods of Egypt. Now we know all this. We've learned this in the Passover. We've learned this, but this is how we're gonna connect this word Pasach later on, and I want us to remember this verse. Then it says here, I am Adonai, and then verse 13. The blood you will serve, the blood will serve you as a sign marking the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I will Pasach. So that's again where we have the word Pasach. Up in verse 12 and in verse 13. It doesn't say Pesach because Pesach is a noun. So it should be always capitalized, Pesach, because it's the Passover lamb. But here, Pasach is a verb. I will hover over you. And I think that that's just a better translation. So it's when I see the blood, because the blood's purpose was, as the destroyer was coming through Goshen or whatever it was to destroy all of Egypt. And when he sees the blood, it's like he will cover over, like we saw with the birds. So he's literally hovering over us. When I strike the land of Egypt, the death blow will not strike you because he's taking on the death blow himself. That's how powerful this passage is here, but it's not rendered this way when you read it just in most translations, most English. Now, Thomas, you usually have a different translation. What does your translation read from verses 11 through 13?
I was actually just looking at that, as a matter of fact, in the scriptures, which is the ISR, the International Research Scriptures. Let me get back here. It says, "I shall pass through the land of Israel of Egypt on that night, and I shall strike the firstborn." So it says pass through also. I was actually looking in my U version for one that said hover over, and I haven't been able to find one yet. But then there are some Yiddish ones I can't read. So
Yeah. But what about verses 12 and 13? Does it use the same language there?
it says pass through rather than pass
Yeah, but
over.
on 13. On
Oh,
13 as well?
uh, no, actually, it does say I shall pass over you.
Okay, so it stays on Passover on both of those. Now,
Yes.
V, do you read the Spanish
Oh
Bible or
no, pass through is 12, pass over is 13.
Okay, but in the Hebrew it would be the same word. The
Correct.
word in Hebrew would be pasach. V, do you read the Spanish version or what version do you read? Go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
No, well, I mean, I use U version.
Oh, the U. Now, what does they say? What do they say in verses 11 or 12, verses 12 and 13?
Well, I was reading the same verse as Tom,
Okay,
and it has Passover and
pass through.
yeah.
Okay. And Lilia, how about you? Do you read an actual Russian version? Is there a Russian version that actually would say something different in Russian?
I will know.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Do you read what version are you reading right now?
One of those new living translation or
Okay,
international.
the New
I
Living.
don't remember. I think
Okay,
one
so
of
what is
them.
the New Living? What does the New Living translation say?
Let me see.
12 and 13, you said?
12 and 13 of Exodus chapter 12.
Or pass through is on 12.
And then 13.
No, I have NIV. NIV is what, New International?
Yes.
NIV.
Yeah, what does NIV say?
Not on that verse, but that's the one I use NIV usually.
Okay. And how about you, Noreen? What does it say on verses 12 and 13? Is he using pass through and then pass over as well?
Sorry.
That's all right.
12 pass through and 13 pass over.
Okay. So now I'm going to share the screen. You guys should be able to see it on here. I think I'm sharing it. Can you guys see the Hebrew there? I'm breaking it down here, and then I come into verse 12, and it says, I will execute judgment, and the Lord, the blood shall be as a sign for you, where in the blood, and I will pass over. So you have right here, it's pasachti. Pasachti means I will pasach, I will hover over. If you go down here to this bottom right here, you'll see the Strong's Hebrew that tells it over here. It says, I will hover or pass over right here. Okay, but it uses the word pasach. Let me hit it real quick here. Okay, when you get up here, you see this right here, it says pasach. So this is different here, pasach. So it talks about, and then it's here about passing over, but it says here, move in a linear motion without stopping. So it says it right here, move in a linear motion without stopping. So how is this meaning passing over? And it's talking about here implying lack of confrontation or engagement in an activity. So it's showing something that's different. If we go to verse 11 down here, let me get back down to verse 11. I'm going to come down here where I'm at verse 11, and it says, I will pass. And there's a different word for it, but let me look. This is for the, and if you come right here to this word, it's a different Greek word, and Hebrew word, and you see it right up here where it says Pesach. So it's 7175 Pesach, which is Passover sacrifice. It's the Passover lamb. It's the feast. And it's a noun. See right here where it says it's a noun. So Pesach is a noun. Pesach is a verb. The translations, most translations that we have mean, it talks about it passing through or passing over. The better, literal, more better translation to that is to hover over, is to actively do something because it's a verb. So there's something taking place here. And just like we saw with the picture of the birds. So I don't really need to labor on this much more. Okay, but I want us to look at that. Okay, so let me read to you kind of stuff that I've wrote down, because I'll just read it to you the way I wrote it, because it's a lot easier, and then we can hopefully bring it together. Okay, so the verb Pesach, from which some argue that Pesach, the noun, comes from, is a proper interpretation translation. However, I say, as well as many scholars, rabbis, and pastors would argue, that the verb Pesach is mistranslated as Passover, Pesach. And that means, like, whoa, okay, if that's right, could the verb Passover be mistranslated in the Bible? And I think that it is. Exodus 12:11 tells us that this is how you are to eat it, with a cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Pesach. So that's the word, Pesach, and it's the noun. Verses 12, what we spent some time looking at, it says, on that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I like that. Highlight that part again. I am the Lord. The term avar. So this is the term. The term avar is what is used above for the word pass through. So in Hebrew, it's pass through there. It's avar. Okay. And is a proper translation of the Hebrew verb. And it is the same verb used for when the destroyer or the slaughterer strikes Egypt in verse 23b and 13b. So if we go down to 13b, just look down in your Bibles, go down to 13b, and that's the second part that we looked at. I will pass over, that's the verb avar, okay? Which we get the word pasak from, but avar is the actual verb that it's used there. Okay, so this is really, hold with me while I'm bringing this up, because I know this is kind of deeper. And I was like, we prayed that I would try to bring out this together. Okay. Verse 23b, jump down to verse 23, get down to verse 23 and 23, the second part of second part of that one would read of 23, the second part of that verse says, okay, I'll read just the beginning one. For Adonai will pass through. Okay, we have this word again, pass through to kill the Egyptians. Well, when he sees the blood on the top and on the two sides, Adonai will avar over the door, and will not allow the slaughterer to enter your houses and kill you. And you are to observe this law, you and your descendants, forever. Okay, so this is pretty wild. This is pretty amazing stuff that's going on here. So when he says that he does this, the slaughter is definitely distinguished from God, even though the judgment comes from God on here. So this is really important. God sent, some people have said, well, is this the destroyer or is this something that God is doing? Well, it's both. There's the destroyer that comes down, the death angel that comes to destroy the people, but God has to allow it to happen. So does that judgment come from God? Absolutely. Because why? Because he will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. Okay, so this is important. Now here's the narrative of the Exodus 12 story that speaks of another action that God stands in contrast to the destructive passing over the land. Okay, let's go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Many of us know this. Notice here that God, this verb, this word, let me go back to Genesis chapter 1. You get to verse 2. Let me get to it. And it's real simple. Linda, you want to read that one? Genesis, we'll just read Genesis chapter 1 and then verse 2. I mean, verses 1 and 2.
In the beginning, God, Elohim, created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, or waste and emptiness, and darkness was upon the face of the earth. The Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters.
That's right. He hovered over the face of the waters. So again, you see this active verb, this action of the Spirit of God hovering over chaos. Because the oceans were considered chaotic, untamed, so to speak, no purpose to them. It was like this chaotic aspect that was taking place, and the Spirit of God hovered over it. So he was in the midst of this chaos, was the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. So you have the same idea that when the death, the destroyer, the destruction, the angel was coming down to destroy Egypt, you have there the very presence of God hovering over the people to protect them. I just think that's really cool. I don't know about you guys, but if you catch that story there, it's really cool. So here's where, and then we go to Isaiah chapter 11, verse 2. Just flip over to Isaiah chapter 11, verse 2. Some of you that have it on your phones, you can get there a lot better than I can get there, I'll tell you. Isaiah, what is it? Chapter 11, verse 2. Sorry. 11, verse 2. And it says here, let me read the verse 1. Here's the word that came from Yeremiyahu, or from Jeremiah, to Jeremiah from Adonai. Listen to the words of this covenant, then speak to the people of Yehuda and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Tell them that Adonai, the God of Israel, says, oops, am I reading that the right one?
You went to Jeremiah, not
Oh,
Isaiah.
I went to Jeremiah. Ay, Chihuahua, Mexico. Ay, Chihuahua. You
Isaiah
read it.
11.
Yeah, Isaiah.
Isaiah 11.
Okay,
I
go
thought it
ahead.
was me.
Verses chapter
I
11
thought I was
verses
wrong.
yeah, no, I was totally in the wrong one. So that's really funny. Isaiah chapter 11 read verses 1 and 2, Linda.
Then a shoot will grow from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel and strength, a spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord.
Amen. And the key point there that I wanted to say was what? The very beginning of it, verse 2. The Spirit of Adonai will rest on him, and the spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and power, spirit of knowledge and fear of Adonai. But the Spirit of God will rest on him or hover over him. Okay, so this is this idea again of the mother chick covering over type of thing. I love that. Okay, so we see those here. So we see that this action is noted by the second verb traditionally rendered pass over. So we saw pass through. Then we see the verb being again avar being used to say pass over. But this is where we get the word Pasach. So therefore, the action that is depicted here and translated as Passover in most Bibles is where the verb Pasach is not accurately translated. This is me saying this. Again, traditionally, Pasach is translated Passover like the noun, but the greater meaning is to hover over or to cover over. That was the other word I was thinking about. So it's to cover over or to hover over. This action depicts God opposing his judgment, not passing over their homes as if watching from his throne, but purposely it shows God hovering over the homes, as well as standing guard at the door, at their doors, because of the blood of the Lamb on the lintels and the doorposts of the Israelites' homes. So you guys capture this? Not only is he covering and hovering and covering this whole situation, he's protecting even the front gate. And does not, scriptures tell us that God kind of goes before us and behind us and leads us and guides us, and he's there for us. And what's that one passage? Did that bring there's a passage about God at the front gates, or protecting you at the front of the city walls or something. I can't remember exactly, but it came to my mind. If that kind of comes to your mind, let me know. But this idea here is that the Passover lamb is hovering over what's going on here and protecting us. I think that's amazing. That's the picture of Passover that we get that is so powerful. So we have two things that are taking place on that night. Not only is God hovering over the Israelites and covering them and protecting them from the destroyer that's going to come and strike down Egypt. And we're going to get into the God moment here in a minute, why he destroys the gods of Egypt and why he's doing this. But he also is the Pesach, the noun that is the Passover lamb. And that's just such a beautiful thing. So this image of the bird that we see as the destroyer or slaughter, the mashhit in Hebrew, strikes a death blow to the Egyptians. And the same idea of striking a death blow to the Pesach lamb in verse 21. But verse 30 states that not one home of the Egyptians escaped without someone dying on it. So we see in verse 30 of Exodus chapter 12 that not one home did not have death over it. Because why? They didn't have the lamb's blood covering their doorposts, right? So that tells us that when the wrath of God is poured out, that those who are being covered and hovered over by the Lord, who are born again, who have the blood of the Lamb written on the doorposts of their hearts, right? Not only are we going to be protected during those times, but God is going to do an amazing thing. He's going to watch over. He's going to take on a lot of this wrath himself. And he did. He took on the wrath of mankind already on the cross, and he's going to complete that when he comes out with this, when he comes back as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So we see all this stuff. Now watch what this. So this is kind of cool part. And I kind of jumped the guns because I already said all this, but I just want to read again because I think this is great. So this Pasach, the meaning, Pasach meaning, as the ancient Israelites would have understood it as a protecting, they would have understood it as a protecting term. And it is found in Isaiah 31, verse 5. So let's go to Isaiah 31, verse 5. Okay, I think I'm in Isaiah this time, not in a different one. I got V cracking up. Okay, and I can't tell if Lilia's cracking up, but I bet she's laughing too. All right, so Isaiah chapter 35 or 31, and then watch what verse 5 says. And this is really cool. So, like hovering birds, Adonai Zevot, Adonai, the Lord of hosts, or the Lord of armies, the army of heaven, will protect Jerusalem. In protecting it, he will rescue it. In sparing it, he will save it. So this is an idiom. This is actually a triplet here, so that we're reading here. In some passages, it says like birds flying or hovering is the word oof, about. So will the Lord of hosts defend, which is here the word cover, which in the Hebrew is ganan. Okay, so this is where we get really fun. So you can write this down, Thomas. You can look it up in the Hebrew later and stuff, but this will be fun. But it's called ganan. And he will ganan Jerusalem. He will cover Jerusalem. Defending or covering, ganan again, is the same word. It's in the English, we don't like to repeat the same words all the time. But in Hebrew, you're going to see the same word. So in Hebrew, we see here where it says, so will the Lord of hosts defend or cover Ganan, Jerusalem. And then it says again, Ganan, covering Ganan, he will also deliver it. And then passing, hovering, or Pasach is the Hebrew word here, over, he will preserve it. So again, we see this verb action of God hovering over. And I hope you guys see the parallels here with the new covenant. Okay, now getting back to the Exodus story of Ganan. Now here's where it gets fun. Oh, go ahead. Thomas, go ahead. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff out here.
No, you're okay. The word hovering in the first part of chapter or first part of verse 5 is the same word as the passing over right before the end of verse 5. Is that correct?
It's a different word in Hebrew on this one,
Okay.
but it's the word, yeah, it's the word ganan. So on this one, or the first one is oof. Yes, the first one is oof. You're talking about Isaiah 31, verse
Yeah,
5.
on my version, it says, like hovering birds, so does Jehovah of hosts protect Jerusalem, protecting and delivering, passing over and rescuing.
Okay.
So
And
is hovering and passing over two different words in the
yeah,
Hebrew?
two different words. The first one,
Okay.
the hovering is oof.
Oh,
UF.
okay.
Yeah. Okay, so oof and then ganan. So you have these two words, oof and ganan. So here's where I kind of bring it all together. Getting back to this Exodus, or if ganan is the parallel Hebrew word to Pasach. So this is where scholars are saying, okay, Pasach isn't really a Hebrew word, but what's the Hebrew equivalent is the Hebrew word ganan. Ganan is to hover over, to protect, to cover. So you have ganan and Pasach, okay? Because they're trying to say Pasach isn't really a Hebrew word here. So if that's the equivalent word is ganan, why didn't God use this word in Exodus? So that's the question. If it's the equivalent word to Pasach, why didn't God use it ganan instead? Why did he use Pasach instead of Ganan? Okay. Verse 12, like we said, I will execute judgment on all the gods of Egypt. So there is an Egyptian word. So this Egyptian word is this. Now, here's where I will repeat this. If you guys need me to repeat this, you can go back and watch a video if I put it up. But the Egyptian word, shka, shka, it's also like, it's almost like, it's quiet. It's like, shka, shka, almost like, shka, like almost shikach. Okay, so that might be the better time of saying it. Shikach. It's a real, and it means to arbor or to booth. So like the same thing that we would use the word sukkot. So we use the word sukkot for an arbor or a booth. The Egyptians would have used the word shikach. Okay, it would have been shikach. Would have been real close to sukkot, right? But with its definite article, the booth, or it means the booth. So the definite article is in Hebrew would be like a P and a 3. That's their definite article in Hebrew. I mean in Egyptian. Okay, and it is usually used in referring to deity. So this word of the booth is typically rendered only to deity. So think about this for a minute, because remember, he goes in verse 12, I will execute judgment against the gods of Egypt. So this is really cool. Okay. So it is connected to another word. The other word that it's connected to is nathar. Okay, everybody write that down. N apostrophe THAR. So together it would be shechach nathar. So SH apostrophe KH dash N apostrophe THAR. So it'd be Shachach Nathar. Shachach Nathar in Egypt means the booth of deity or a shrine. We get this image. So now you picture this shrine, so to speak, of their deity, of their particular gods. Okay. This is really cool as we get this out. And it was depicting a facade or a frontal of a shrine with an emblem of the deity among the Egyptians. So when they built these shrines to their gods, the Egyptians, they put an emblem or the god's picture of whatever is the god of Ra, all the gods that Egypt had. They would have these shrines made out, and they would. Don't we get the same picture when you think of Buddha? And you think of the Buddhists who have a shrine made out to Buddha, and they have Buddha there and they have the symbol on it. We see a lot of different shrines throughout Hinduism, throughout the world. And all these shrines have images or this seal or this emblem, so to speak, of their god on it to signify what that temple or what that shrine is supposed to cover. So watch what it says. It was depicting a facade or a frontal of a shrine with an emblem of divinity among the Egyptians. Now the term Pesach is repeatedly belonging only to Yahweh or le Yahweh, towards Yahweh. We see that in verse 11 of chapter 12. We see it in verse 27 of chapter 12 and verse 48 of chapter 12. So this Hebrew word, the noun Pesach, only belongs to Yahweh. It's not used for any Egyptian deity. Okay, so it only belongs to Yahweh. So we'll get into this idea here. Passover, the Paschal lamb, the Passover lamb is only connected to Yahweh. All the shrines of Egypt and all the shrines of all these other ones were into their particular gods. Okay. Okay. And it's explained in terms of Yahweh's Pasach action. So this is what's really cool. And I wrote this down when we see verses 11 verse through 13, and then verse 27 again, we see this verb of God hovering over. So here's where I'm trying to come with it. Many scholars are adhering that Pesach, the Passover lamb, does not come from the verb Pasach. So most scholars do not believe we get the word Pesach from Pasach. That's really wild, because you would think that they're so close in connection to one another that you would think that the verb Pasach is easily translated over to the noun Pesach, but it's not. Most scholars don't agree with this. So, but rather it has an Egyptian origin from Shekach Nathar. So that is where, hi Peggy, welcome. I'm sorry you're so late. You didn't miss a lot. You just missed a whole bunch.
Sorry, better late than never.
If you look at everybody online right now, their eyes are crossed and their brain has smoke coming out of it because we're going so deep tonight. So you'll have to go back and watch the video to get it. And maybe I'm hoping I can spend we can talk about it next week if you guys do your study, and we can talk more about it, but we'll bring it to a conclusion where we'll make it real simple. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put you on mute here real quick now so I don't echo. Okay, there we go. So I got you on mute so we don't echo. Thank you. So let me read it again. Many scholars are adhering that Pesach does not come from the verb Pesach, but rather has an Egyptian origin from the word Shechach Nathar. The Pesach of Adonai, or the Passover lamb, and the Shechan Nachar of Egypt were the sites of religious practice. For Egyptians, they placed emblems of deity and writings around the door frame and offered sacrifices to the resurrection of their pharaohs, and were considered contributions to the ongoing life of the deceased. So this is where we see where they go out to the pharaoh's tombs and they'd offer all these things and bring it in and all that. Oh, we lost Lilia. She's back. Okay, good. Okay, so Egypt would have seen the Shechach Nathar of their gods as shelters, but came out with nothing but death because their gods could not save them. While they saw the Shechach tombs, the houses or shelters of the Israelites, covered in lamb's blood, with all retreating out of those shelters, protected by the Pesach of Adonai, completely destroying the gods of Egypt. Okay, did you guys bring that together? Did you catch that? Did you bring that together, Linda?
I think so. But I'm wondering, I don't think that Shechach Nathar is not related to Pasach. Is it? Those two words are not related.
Those two words is where the loan word of Pasach comes from. So those two words, Shechach Nathar, is where, because it refers to a deity shrine, and there's an emblem of the deity on those shrines, is connected to this term Pasach that was loaned from that language of covering or hovering. And so what the Egyptians believed was that their gods, as they sacrificed and they brought things for the resurrection of the pharaoh's sacrifices and prayers and offerings and stuff that they did they came to their shrines and at their pharaohs, for the pharaoh's resurrection and their God's resurrection, what they recognized was that there was nothing there but death. And then they looked upon the houses of all the Israelites that became kind of their house, or their booth is kind of like a shrine. So their booth had blood on it from a lamb that was only directed to the God of Israel, not to some kind of God of Egypt or some kind of pharaoh or anything. It was only loaned over to Israel. So when they saw that them all coming out from their shrine, so to speak, or their booths, because they put the emblem of the blood across the doorposts and the lintels, that when they saw the children of Israel emerge from there, it was obvious that God, the destroyer, all they saw was death in their gods that they put their trust in, and all they saw was life coming from the Israelites, and it was connected to the God of Israel, because only Pesach, the noun, the sacrificial lamb is what protected them. The blood is what protected them, not some kind of emblem or not some kind of deity or something like that. Thomas, I thought you had your hand up or somebody. Yeah, go ahead, Thomas. And then Linda has her hand up.
It almost sounds like they're really referring to the blood on the lintel rather than the actual hovering over. I mean, it's almost like they're if they're equating the Egyptian words with Pesach, and the Egyptian words are about the idols that are on their doorpost. It really seems like their analogy actually falls more to the blood than it does the lamb itself.
Right. Right. And it's kind of a dual approach there, Thomas, with the fact that the Egyptians were looking for their covering or their guarding, their protection, so to speak, from their gods to bring them out of this. And then all they met with their gods and everything else was death. And then all they see was a lamb that was slaughtered among the Israelites, and it was only referred to their God as Yahweh that covered their doorposts, that out of their homes. So basically, if you take these word booths, and that's where that word shechach is, that booth, what they do is they out of their booths comes life everlasting, and it was only lamb's blood. And in their mind, they're thinking, how could lamb's blood be so powerful to protect them from this death angel? So we have that word protection, to cover over and to hover over the children of Israel, because God himself took on that death angel, so to speak, to hover over and to protect them. So what they saw coming out of the booths of the Israelites is not a shrine to their gods, but a blood that represented the God protecting them as they came out, and that no death was there. But in all the Egyptians' households, there was death. I mean, I hope I'm answering it. I'm trying to bring it around, but it's this word Pasach isn't really a Hebrew word, but it became a Hebrew word because it was taken from this idea of the gods, the deity's booth, or the deity's protection, or the deity's household wasn't strong enough to protect them, no matter how many emblems they put on their doors or on their homes or on these shrines, that there was not anything that could protect them from this destroyer that came down and destroyed the firstborn among all of Egypt, including the livestock. But then all of a sudden, this little bit of blood that was connected to Yahweh destroyed that whole concept to the Egyptians, therefore destroyed all of their gods just with that one understanding there. Linda, you have, like you're asking, her brain's going over, she's smoking over here. I gotta.
Well, I'm wondering the original meaning of in Egyptian Pasach, and how did the Egyptians use that word in their worship?
Well, that word, that's why I said their word had something to do with hovering. And so when they put the emblem of their God on their shrines, their gods hovered over that shrine, so to speak. And so there was protection by worshiping that particular God, by bringing sacrifices to that God, trusting Pharaoh or whatever like that, that shrine or that emblem. Like we've seen, all of us have seen the Eye of Ra, right? The Eye of Ra in Egyptian images and stuff like that. By them taking that and putting it over their homes, they would have expected their God of, or let's say that Ra, would hover over them and protect them. So that's how they use that word Pasach, because it's connected to the Shechar, the Shechach Nathar, which is that covering that they were expecting to have. So they see lamb's blood going over the doorpost of the homes of the Egyptians, and they're like, that's nothing. Our gods have something even greater. And so their shrines, their homes had the emblems. It's kind of like in a way where people put up, I don't know, they put up, you walk into their homes and they got a picture of their God or something like that. Same kind of thing that or they're wearing a necklace and they say this will, or you guys have all seen the hand, the Jewish hand that kind of looks like this, which I don't really have. I don't really like that. And it's more mysticism, more Kabbalah, where you see a Jewish palm with the hands that basically it's going to protect you from bad spirits. I'm sorry, only the Holy Spirit protects us from the bad spirits. But go ahead, Thomas.
So it'd be like a talisman.
Yeah, yeah.
Or an amulet. Like instead of wearing it around your neck, you attach it to your doorpost.
Exactly. And it's kind of like what we do with the mezuzah. The mezuzah doesn't bring any protection, All the mezuzah does is remind us that we're putting God's words on our doorposts as a blessing, and to remember that God is the one that we honor in this household. He's the one that we give, and he's our provider. So I guess if I can connect this together, and to help Linda, because Linda's trying to get the connection, is the Egyptian word Pasach, what it meant to, they were covered through the shrine or through the sacrifices of their gods that they devoted themselves to and put up their emblems. And so to see this Israelite, these slaves, just use lamb's blood, there's no way that that's greater than our gods. And so when they see the lamb's blood being put on the door frames and on the lintels, just imagine what was going on throughout that day. So if all the slaves were doing this and going around, it took a long time to put a blood on the door frame and on the lintels. It had to take some time, and the Egyptians had to see this. So this connection to the ancient Egyptians are watching this going on, and they've already experienced 9 plagues. And their gods are not covering them, protecting them. And that's what I mean by hovering over or covering, is there's this protection clause. Remember, looking at this again, just sharing this as such for Ingrid and for Peggy, who came on here. Let me just share this little video of you. We're talking about Pasach tonight, the difference between Pasach, covering, and hovering, and then protecting. If you see this bird over here hovering over and protecting the birds, and you see this other one here where this bird is hovering and over, they're protecting the chicks from the actual rain, the weather coming down. And then we see this other one right here, which I love this one. We see the rain coming down. Look at that. That is this beautiful picture there. So you see this bird making this beautiful umbrella, even though the head of the bird is still taking a lot of the rain. It's protecting the children completely. This is the word Pasach in Hebrew. This is what Pasach would mean. That word Pasach is a loan word from Egypt that comes from these 2 ideas of Shechach Nathar, which means to guard and to protect, and to be the entryways into the shrines of their gods, right? So their homes. So they would put up emblems of their gods around their homes when they saw the Israelites simply putting blood that was solely connected, only connected to Yahweh. So you see this striking difference here. Let me look at the other one's kind of cool too. I like that one even better. The husband's being protected by the wife. Way to go, ladies. Way to go. You can do it. You can do it. And she's looking up at the camera like, yeah, he's a lazy bum. He's a lazy bum. Get out of here. Get out of here. So, but here, let me get out of there real quick. Okay, let me stop sharing. All right, so I hope you guys understand this difference. So what would have been going on in Egypt was, after these 9 plagues, they're watching the Israelites put blood of a lamb or a goat on their door frame and on the lintels of their house. And they're saying, well, what is that going to do against what I have on my home? I'm covered by the pharaohs. I'm covered by the gods, and I'm covered by this. And they had their emblems. These are mere slaves. And what are they? I don't know what they're doing. But all through that night, as the destroyer came and destroyed us, not one household in Egypt was left untouched. They were all had death connected to it. So therefore, the last striking blow of God and the power of God coming over was not only just to cover over the Israelites and to take on the death blow, the destroyer himself. The Egyptians experienced the death blow, and their emblems to their gods that would have been part of their shrine or their booth of their homes would have had no protection clause over them, because they were not covered by the blood of the Lamb, which is Pesach. So again, Pesach is a noun. It's not connected. It's not taken from the word Pasach. So this is how we can close it. It's not taken from Pasach. Pasach comes from these other Egyptian ideas of the shrines to their gods and covering over them and their protection from there. But Pesach is a noun that simply means Passover lamb, that was placed on the houses and the homes of the Israelites. And then God Pasach, he hovered over and covered over and took the torture himself to protect the Egyptians. And this is where we get these passages in the Bible that talk about the rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous, right? When God pours out his judgment, you see Noah is there in the midst of it as he's leaving or not Noah, Lot. As Lot is leaving, judgment is being poured out on Sodom and Gomorrah right there and then, and God was protecting them. But he gave them a clause. He goes, in your process of leaving, don't turn around and look back. And Lot's wife turned around, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Noah was proclaiming God's goodness. He was proclaiming the greatness of God. He was proclaiming that it's going to rain, and everybody's saying, it's not going to rain. It has never rained. What are you even talking about rain here? What's this big old boat that you're building? Wait. The animals are showing up. Whoa. And we see at the end there where God himself shut up the ark himself and fixed it from being able to be taken on the water. And at the midst of God's outpouring, they were there. They were in the midst of this. They were going through that process. I think all of these are a picture, especially the Passover lamb. This is a picture of what's going to happen in the end days, is that as God we begin to approach the end days, and as we see God pouring out his wrath and things are taking place, we're going to be covered. We're going to be protected. Now, some believers are going to get their heads chopped off, and we're seeing it happen today. Just in this past week, just in Congo, just in the country of Congo, 70 Christians were brought into a church. They were all tied to the pews and they were beheaded, male, female, and children. These are Christians in the country of Congo, okay, in Africa. Think about that for a minute. So people are not fully, we're not going to be fully protected in the sense that our lives are not going to be taken in that aspect for some people. But God is hovering over us, and he is watching over us, and he is protecting us. And those people are going to be part of the people that speaks about when we see it in Revelation. I think it's Revelation chapter 12. I'm not sure, but it talks about the martyrs under the throne of God, crying out to God, how much longer, how much longer, how much longer? So we're seeing people that are beheaded. We know that they're already crowned with glory under the throne of God. They're already there, and they're actually interceding on our behalf to say how much longer. So this is really amazing stuff. So during the midst of God pouring out what he's going to wrath upon the people against the so to speak, the Egyptians, the wicked out there, the wicked, he's going to hover over us, and that's the picture. And then we see the picture of Yeshua on the cross, who was expended. I mean, hovering, extended up on the cross, and he's there hovering, and he's up on the cross and he's taking on the sins of the world. He himself is being our Pasach as well as being our Pesach. So does that make sense, guys? He's not only the Pasach, the one who covers us, protects us, and guards us, but he's the one who also Pesach, and by doing that, it said that he brought victory even over death. The sting of death no longer even has victory because he took on the destroyer. So this picture, this image of what we see in Passover, and I hope I got across what I was trying to get across tonight. There was a lot of information here, but in simplest of terms, Yeshua has to fulfill all the aspects of Passover. And one of them that I think that just does not do justice is this understanding how we have translated that word Pasach, which should be in most Bibles. We talked about it, Ingrid and Peggy, before you guys came on. We talked about it in most translations. It uses two words, pass through on one and pass over on another one. And those two are kind of really not the proper translations. The proper translation for the word Pasach really means to cover or to hover over. Okay. And so we see Yeshua hovering over us as he took on the death angel on the cross. We see the Passover, the Pasach of the bird. We see the bird hovering over the chicks. That's the concept. That's the verb behind Pasach. So you have the Pasach, the verb, to hover and to cover, and then the noun, which is the Pesach, the lamb, the Passover lamb. Any questions, guys? I know I brought up a lot of stuff there. Any additions, anything you want to add to it? Maybe a revelation that you just received in this what we've been talking about tonight, because it is a lot. I gave us a lot tonight. And poor V over there, her brain's all crossfired right there. Are you okay tonight? Your mind blown? So I would encourage you guys to go back and watch this. I was praying that I could have clarity on bringing this forward. But for me, when I did this study and I was bringing all this forward and doing this a while ago, this is something I've studied every year. So this is something that I put together a while ago. I didn't do justice in my sermon as much as and I didn't do justice tonight in the teaching, but if you can capture what I'm talking about, imagine a bunch of Egyptians building shrines, and they considered their homes a place for their gods. And they would have put emblems of their god on the entryway of their homes or their booths. And when their God did not protect them, and they found death in every single home of the Egyptians, but they see the Israelites walking out of their booths or out of their homes with just a little bit of a smear of blood on the door frames and on the lintels of their home, and they were completely protected. There was this image of God totally hovering over when the death angel came. And that's really what it's all about. He didn't pass through like he was going over a speed bump. God didn't pass over like he was going over a speed bump. He literally covered the children of Israel. Amen. Linda had her hand raised, and then we'll go to Thomas.
When you were talking about God hovering over us, it made me think of the robe of righteousness that God sees over us. Thank you, Yeshua.
Okay.
And it makes me wonder if there's a scripture that somehow relates that robe of righteousness hovers over us, but I don't know if
I would think it's got the image already be in it. I mean, the image of God's robe of righteousness hovers over us. I mean, that in itself shows that he's spread his blanket over us, right? So to speak. It was funny. We were at the zoo yesterday. So Linda and I went to Zoo Miami. We like to go to the zoos and stuff like that. And it was our day off. So we went over to the zoo, and it was raining. It came down like buckets, man. We had just got the little bicycle that you can ride around in the zoo with a little covering it. Yeah. And Linda, she moved over to the center so she wouldn't get any wet, and she hugged onto me, and so she stole all my heat as I'm getting wet and soaked. It was funny. I looked like Two-Face. This whole side of me was completely wet. My left side was completely wet. My shoe was wet. My socks were wet. My whole shirt was wet. And then this other side was dry. So Linda was holding on to me so I wouldn't get wet. But during that time, it was a lot of fun because a lot of people were leaving and getting rained on. And it was coming down pretty heavy. And we were under a tree. And so we stayed pretty dry, but it got a little colder out. But we come around the corner, when we actually started looking around and going to the different cages, we see the orangutans. And one of the orangutans walks around and just normal, along with the chimpanzee, just kind of walking normal. And then here comes another orangutan around the corner. It threw a blanket over its side. It literally,
just like so many people that we saw.
yeah, it was awesome. It was
a towel over itself.
I can't remember if we got a picture of it or not. Did we get a picture? I can't. No, it was the coolest thing because the orangutan walks around the shelter or the area where they kind of hang out, and he's got this big old blanket over him, and he's the smart one out of everybody out there. He's totally covering himself and protecting himself. So I think that the image of God's robe of righteousness is really what we want, because we don't want our robes. We want his robes of righteousness surrounding us. Go ahead, Thomas.
I was reading a little bit passing through here, and I was looking at verse 23 and 24 in Exodus 12. And when the Lord passes through to strike down the Egyptians, you'll see the blood on top of it and the sides of the door frame, and will pass over the doorway. He will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses or strike you down. When I read that, it really, really does give us the symbolism of Jehovah sitting over the top of us and not letting the destroyer get to the houses with the blood.
Right.
It may say that the Lord is passing over, but it with that same mindset that we've been talking about tonight, he's not doing it in a quick fashion. He may be passing from house to house as the destroyer goes through the city, assuming that they go house by house and it doesn't just happen all at once but in the theory of that, Jehovah was still, it shows that he was covering over and not letting his destroyer angel get to the people that had the blood. So I think that's another good area where you can find that the word really should be hover rather than pass over or pass through.
Yeah.
And then
and it is the word Pasach there. It's not Pesach. So it is
Correct.
Pasach. It's to hover over.
Yeah. And then on the other note, we had a little amusement park in Des Moines that's called Adventureland. And our favorite time to go was in the summer times during the week. And usually we like to go when it was going to rain for a few minutes in the afternoon, because it would clear out the whole park and we could ride all the rides we wanted to. And so, you may be a little bit wet, but when you can get on the same roller coaster 6 times in a row without ever having to even get off of it, you dry out pretty quick.
Yeah, you dry out pretty quick. Yeah. And so, and I hope you guys caught what Thomas was saying there. When you read it in some of these translations, because it says Passover, the idea eludes you. The idea doesn't stick around in the sense that God is somehow taking on the strikes and the blows for us. And yet you see that image of Yeshua taking on the sins of the world by being up on the cross. You see Yeshua taking the striking blows. I hope you guys watch Mel Gibson's the Passion of the Christ again during this season. I hope you watch I guess coming out in theaters. Linda and I think Noreen are talking about going together, and some other people should get together and we should go watch. We'll let the girls do it because they have to have the girls' night out, but we will. I'll hide in the back. I'll get a ticket and get in the way back. Me and Thomas will go in the back or something like that. But but the thing is that
The Last Supper.
it's called The Last Supper. The Chosen is putting on one called The Last Supper, and I think it's a 3-part. It's going to be a 3-part thing. So it's definitely coming up. So keep your eyes open for that. It's got to be out in theaters coming up somewhere. So if you guys find that, let's take a do it. Let's see if we can go together. But I think that Ingrid and Peggy, you guys came in a little bit late, and I gave a lot of information at the beginning. But really what we were talking about here is the 2 words. One, Pasach, is a verb. It means to cover or to hover over. And the other one, Pesach, simply refers to, it's a noun that refers to the Passover lamb. So V, does that help at all? Do you get it? Yeah, got it? Okay, good. Did you get the whole concept here? Okay, good. Because I really want you guys to capture this, because this is the whole story behind Passover. It's not just having the Passover meal. It's not just understanding that somehow God brought them up out of Egypt and all those things, but the very fact that God himself came down and was active and came down and protected the Israelites when he sent the destroyer to destroy all of Egypt. He didn't put a limitation on the destroyer. If there would have been an Israelite's home that did not have the blood on it over the lintel and over their doorpost, they would have experienced death in that home. Think about that for a minute. And the Egyptians, the sojourners that were among them that left with Egypt or left Israel out of Egypt, most likely they were invited into some of those homes, or they too put the blood of the lamb over their door frames and their lintels because they saw what was going on here. And they were righteous non-Jews or non-Israelites or whatever, because they weren't Jews at the time. They would have been protected because that was the process that God wanted to bring in, to bring that protection, that hovering over. So there wasn't a limitation. He did not limit the destroyer to say only go to the houses of the Egyptians. He says go and destroy the firstborn. And he covered all of Egypt, all of the land, including the firstborn of livestock as well as humans. And in the process of the destroyer coming down and destroying everyone, God himself came over, like we saw the picture of the birds, hovering over his people and taking those blows of death himself. That is powerful. That is really powerful. I don't know if you guys get it. It almost makes you want to cry because of the work that God did, and what he accomplished. And he shows it in the Tanakh. And if anybody reads Hebrew, they're going to see that there's a difference going on here. There's a word play that's going on here of hovering and of a verb and of a noun, of a verb and a noun. And then you see the verb, and then the noun. And it's like there's a connection here that the hovering, the protection is connected to Pesach, but they're 2 different words. Pesach does not come from Pasach, right? Pesach comes from the lamb, and this word Pasach comes from the Egyptian understanding of the shechach, or the shechach nathar. So that's where Pasach comes from, that idea, that concept. So it's been pulled out of there. So anyhow, that's the study for tonight. If anybody has anything you want to add to it or any questions, love to answer them right now. I'm excited for it. Let's close in prayer and then we'll close tonight. Avinu Malkeinu, Father our King, we thank you for this evening. Thank you for this word. Thank you for this teaching. Lord, I pray that this depth of what you did for us during the Passover season becomes greater than the Passover meal and the gathering itself. The meaning behind what you did is so amazing. We are so thankful, God, for you taking on the blows of the enemy on our behalf. As we see the mother bird covering her chicks and just taking on the greatness of the storm, Lord, that's what you've done for us. You've covered us. You've watched over us. You've you've endured it for our sake. We think of you, Lord, upon the cross that took on all the sins of the world, and you hovered yourself over us to protect us from death, and you destroyed death. You found victory over death because of what you did. You Pasach, you hovered over us, you covered us with your blood, Lord, with your blood. And it's only through you, Lord, that we find redemption, only through you. So we give you this evening, we thank you for your redemption. We thank you for this word together, and we give you glory in Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen.